Cordelia Ashworth watched the Comanche warrior she had hired to repair her fence suddenly drop his hammer and fall to his knees beside the broken post. His calloused hands clawed at the dry earth with desperate urgency. The morning sun cast long shadows across her failing ranch as Equip unearthed something that made her blood turn cold. A leather pouch emerged from the dirt, dark with age and bound tight with rawhide cord. Equip's fingers trembled as he untied the binding. Papers spilled onto the ground, maps drawn in careful ink, metal objects that caught the light wrong. His face went pale beneath the weathered bronze of his skin. Cordelia stepped forward. Her worn boots crunched on the scattered stones where her fence had been destroyed 3 nights ago. The sound made Equip look up. His eyes held something she had never seen before. Not anger, not greed, terror. He gathered the contents with shaking hands, rose to his feet like a man carrying his own death warrant. The leather pouch disappeared beneath his shirt. His tools lay forgotten in the dust. Without a word, Equip turned toward the wilderness that stretched beyond her property line. His stride lengthened with each step. Soon he was running. Cordelia stood alone beside the half-repaired fence. The morning wind carried the scent of sage and distant rain. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She had hired him because no one else would work for what little she could pay. Because his daughter needed medicine and he needed money more than pride. Now he was gone, taking with him whatever secret had been buried on her land. The sound of approaching hooves made her turn. Martha Hendricks sat high on her wagon seat, her sharp eyes taking in every detail of the abandoned tools and Cordelia's stricken face. "Mercy me." Martha's voice carried the particular satisfaction of someone whose warnings had proven correct. "What happened here?" He found something buried by the post. Found something or planted something. Martha climbed down from her wagon with practiced ease. Her seamstress fingers smoothed her dark skirts. "I told you no good would come of hiring his kind." Cordelia's jaw tightened. She had heard similar words from half the town when word spread that she had employed Equip. The other half had simply stopped speaking to her altogether. He took whatever it was and ran. The admission tasted bitter. Left everything behind. Martha walked to where the tools lay scattered. She nudged the hammer with her boot. Probably came back in the night to hide stolen goods. Used the fence work as an excuse to dig them up again. The explanation felt wrong. Cordelia had watched Equip's face when he opened that pouch. A guilty man would have looked triumphant, or at least satisfied. Equip had looked hunted. "You should report this to Sheriff Murdoch." Martha's tone carried the weight of certainty. "Before that savage comes back for more hoofbeats." This time the heavy sound of multiple horses moving fast. Sheriff Clayton Murdoch appeared with 2 of his deputies. Their faces showed no surprise at finding the women alone beside the broken fence. "Heard there was trouble out here." Murdoch dismounted with the careful movements of a large man trying to appear gentle. His star caught the sunlight. "Mrs. Hendricks sent word." Cordelia glanced at Martha. The seamstress had somehow found time to send a message before arriving herself. The impossibility of the timing made her stomach tighten. "The Comanche I hired found something buried here." Cordelia kept her voice steady. "Then he left." "Left or fled?" Deputy Barnes pushed back his hat. His hand rested on his gun belt. "There's a difference. He ran." The truth came out harder than she intended. Murdoch nodded as if this confirmed something he had already known. "This is exactly what we warned you about, Mrs. Ashworth. These people can't be trusted." The wind picked up. Dust swirled around the broken fence posts. Cordelia thought about Equip's daughter, the little girl who coughed through the nights in their camp beyond the town limits. The way Equip had spoken to her in their own language, his voice soft with tenderness. "What did he take?" Deputy Morrison crouched beside the disturbed earth. His fingers traced the edges of the hole. "Papers, maps, something metal. The three men exchanged glances. Martha watched from beside her wagon, her expression unreadable. Could be anything. Murdoch's voice carried false comfort. Probably nothing valuable. But you can't be too careful living out here alone. The word hung in the air like smoke. Cordelia had been alone since her husband died 6 months ago. Alone when the creditors came. Alone when the bank threatened foreclosure. Alone when her neighbors stopped visiting and her friends found reasons to stay away. I should get back to town. Martha climbed onto her wagon seat. This news will travel fast. The wagon rolled away, carrying with it the certainty that by sunset, every person in town would know about Cordelia's latest failure in judgment. The woman who had trusted a Comanche with her property had been robbed for her foolishness. Murdoch mounted his horse. His deputies followed suit. You should consider Banker Grimwald's offer, Mrs. Ashworth. This land is too dangerous for a woman alone. They rode away in a cloud of dust. Cordelia remained beside the broken fence, staring at the hole where Equop had found his terrible secret. The sun climbed higher. The wind grew stronger. Somewhere in the distance, a hawk circled on motionless wings. She gathered Equop's abandoned tools. The hammer felt heavy in her hands. His work had been careful, precise, the kind of craftsmanship that spoke of pride rather than haste. A guilty man would have taken his tools. Evening came with painted clouds and the promise of storm. Cordelia sat on her porch, watching the wilderness where Equop had disappeared. The foreclosure notice lay on the table beside her. 14 days to pay what she could never raise. Banker Theodore Grimwald had made his offer clear. He would pay her debts and give her enough to start fresh somewhere safer. Somewhere far from the frontier. Somewhere she could disappear into. The anonymity of civilized failure. The wind rattled the loose boards of her roof. Her husband had meant to fix those boards. He had meant to do many things before the riding accident that broke his neck and left her with debts she had never known existed. She thought about Equop's eyes, the terror she had seen there, the way he had looked at her as if apologizing for something she did not yet understand. A guilty man would not have looked sorry. Darkness fell complete and star-filled. Cordelia remained on her porch, waiting for something she could not name. The night sounds of the frontier surrounded her. Coyotes calling across empty miles. The whisper of wind through grass that had never known a plow. 14 days to lose everything. 14 days to discover whether the Comanche warrior who had found buried secrets would prove to be her salvation or her final destruction. 3 nights passed in silence, broken only by wind and distant thunder that never brought rain. Cordelia sat on her porch each evening, watching shadows lengthen across the broken fence. The abandoned tools remained where Equop had dropped them. Rust began to bloom on the metal edges. On the 4th night, he returned. A shadow detached itself from the darkness near her barn. Cordelia's hand found the rifle leaning against her chair. The figure moved with careful steps across the yard. Moonlight caught the angles of his face. Mrs. Ashworth. His voice carried none of the broken English he had used before. Each word fell clear and precise. Please, your life is in more danger than you know. She kept the rifle steady. You speak differently now. I speak as I always have, just not where others could hear. Equop stepped into the circle of lamplight from her window. His clothes were dust-covered. His eyes held the weight of sleepless nights. The leather pouch hung from his belt. Why did you come back? Because running would make me a coward. He sat on the porch step without invitation. His movements spoke of exhaustion that went deeper than bone. And because you deserve the truth. Cordelia lowered the rifle, but did not set it aside. The night air carried the scent of sage and something else. Something that spoke of distant places and old sorrows. Equop opened the leather pouch. Papers rustled in the stillness. He spread them on the porch boards between them. Maps drawn in careful detail, lists written in multiple hands, metal stamps that bore the reversed images of cattle brands. Your fence was not broken by accident. The map showed her property marked with arrows and timing notations. Cordelia leaned forward, studying the careful lines that traced paths across her land. Paths she had never walked, but recognized from the strange tracks she had found and dismissed. Someone has been moving cattle through here. Equop's finger traced the routes. Stolen cattle. Changed brands. Sold to buyers who ask no questions. Stolen from where? My people's former lands, ranches to the north. Anywhere the taking can be hidden long enough to alter the marks of ownership. Cordelia studied the brand stamps. Each one showed the mirror image of legitimate marks. Tools for theft disguised as correction. Her stomach tightened with understanding. The people who destroyed your fence needed a clear passage. Equop gathered the papers with careful hands. Your property connects two valleys. Without it, their route is blocked. Sheriff Murdoch said you probably buried these things yourself. Sheriff Murdoch knows exactly what these things are. The words hung in the night air. Cordelia felt the ground shift beneath her certainty. She thought of Murdoch's quick arrival, his lack of surprise at finding trouble, the way he had exchanged glances with his deputies. How long have you known about this? I have been tracking stolen herds for 3 months. The trail always ended at your property line. Equop's voice carried the weight of old grief. My daughter needs medicine. Tracking cattle was the only skill that might earn enough money to buy it, but you found more than cattle tracks. I found this. He held up a piece of paper covered in careful handwriting. A list of problems that need solving. Cordelia read the names by lamplight. Sarah Mitchell sold her land last month. Rebecca Foster disappeared 2 weeks ago. At the bottom, written in fresh ink, her own name stared back at her. They want me to sell. They want you gone. Equop folded the paper. Selling is only one way to accomplish that. The wind picked up, rattling the loose boards of her roof. Cordelia thought about her husband's riding accident. The way his horse had returned without him. The broken neck that the doctor said came from a bad fall. My husband refused to sell this land. Your husband's name is on an older list. The words fell into silence that stretched between them. Cordelia felt something cold settle in her chest. 6 months of grief suddenly carried the taste of different truth. I could take this evidence to the territorial authorities. Equop's voice remained steady. But they will not listen to a Comanche's word against white businessmen. I need your help. Help with what? Proving what these papers show. Catching them in the act. Making them face justice. Cordelia looked at the foreclosure notice visible through her window. 11 days remained. 11 days to find money she did not have or lose everything she had left. Helping you will make me a target. You are already a target. Equop rose to his feet. The only question is whether you face it alone or with an ally. She thought about the strange cattle tracks, the destroyed fence, the eager offers to buy her land at prices far below its worth, the coincidence of troubles that had started after her husband's death. If what you say is true, they will take my land anyway. If what I say is true, justice might save it. Cordelia stood, rifle loose in her hands. She looked at this man who had returned when running would have been safer, who spoke of justice when revenge would have been easier, who risked his life for a white woman's property when his own people had lost everything. What do you need? And me to do? Be my eyes in town, listen to conversations. Watch for signs of the next cattle movement. Equop stepped back into shadow. And trust that honor can exist between enemies. We are not enemies. Your people and mine have been for longer than either of us has lived. Cordelia extended her hand. The gesture felt strange in the moonlight. Dangerous in ways she did not fully understand. Wap looked at her outstretched palm for a long moment. Then he took her hand in his. His grip was firm and calloused from honest work. His skin carried the warmth of life lived under open sky. Partners then. Partners. They shook hands in the lamplight while night wind carried the scent of coming storm. Neither noticed the figure that detached itself from the shadows near the road. Neither saw Martha Hendricks retreat from her listening post beside the broken fence. Equip disappeared into darkness as silently as he had come. Cordelia remained on her porch, studying the maps he had left behind. The careful routes traced across her property spoke of months of planning. The altered brand suggested skills passed down through generations of thieves. She thought about her husband finding these same papers, about the accident that had claimed his life, about the eager offers to buy her land from people who had never shown interest before. The storm that had threatened for days finally broke. Rain fell in heavy drops that struck the dust and released the scent of earth awakening. Cordelia gathered the papers and went inside, leaving the broken fence to stand guard over secrets that demanded justice. 11 days to lose everything, or 11 days to discover whether trust between strangers could prove stronger than the corruption that had taken root in her community. Thunder rolled across the sky. Lightning illuminated the wilderness where Equip had vanished. In the distance, cattle lowed with voices that might belong to stolen herds moving through the night toward buyers who would ask no questions about altered brands or suspicious timing. The rain fell harder, washing dust from the abandoned tools and filling the hole where buried secrets had waited for the right hands to uncover them. The investigation began at dawn. Cordelia watched from her kitchen window as Equipa moved across the disturbed ground near her fence. His steps followed, patterns invisible to her eyes. He knelt at intervals, reading stories written in displaced earth and broken grass. She joined him in the yard. The morning air carried the clean scent of yesterday's rain. Puddles reflected sky between the hoofprints that marked her property. 12 head moved through here 2 nights ago. Equip's finger traced the edge of a deep track. Driven hard, the riders were in a hurry. Where did they go? North toward the railway. The brands will be changed before they reach the loading pens. Cordelia studied the churned earth. To her untrained eye, it looked like chaos. To Equip, it spoke of precise timing and practiced efficiency. A business built on theft and violence disguised as legitimate trade. I need to be seen in town today. She brushed mud from her hands. People will expect me to complain about your disappearance. And I need to follow this trail before it grows cold. They separated at the road. Cordelia walked toward town while Equip melted into the wilderness that bordered her property. The sun climbed higher, burning off the moisture from last night's storm. Dust began to rise again from the wagon ruts and horse tracks. Town felt different now. Every conversation held hidden meaning. Every glance carried the weight of suspicion. Cordelia moved through the general store and post office, playing the role of abandoned employer seeking sympathy for her poor judgment. That Comanche took advantage of your kind heart. Mrs. Patterson shook her head over the fabric counter. These people cannot be trusted with honest work. Sheriff Murdoch says he probably planted whatever he dug up. Mr. Henley weighed flour with exaggerated care, making it look like theft to cover his real purpose. Cordelia nodded and made appropriate sounds of distress, but she watched faces now, listened for the words beneath the words. The town's righteous anger felt rehearsed, too convenient, too uniform in its conclusions. Martha Hendricks appeared at her elbow near the pharmacy. How are you managing, dear? This must be such a shock. I keep wondering what he buried on my property. Probably stolen goods. These people have no respect for ownership. Martha's hand rested briefly on Cordelia's arm. The important thing is that you are safe. Safe from what? From making the same mistake twice. Martha's smile carried teeth. Banker Grimwald mentioned his offer is still available. Perhaps this incident is Providence showing you the way forward. Cordelia left town with her purchases and a growing certainty that every person she had spoken with knew more than they admitted. The concern for her safety rang false. The eagerness to discuss Grimwald's offer felt coordinated. She found Equop waiting in her barn when she returned. His clothes were dust-covered and torn from pushing through brush. His face held the grim satisfaction of a hunter who had found his quarry. The trail leads to a box canyon 5 miles north. He accepted the water she offered. There is a camp there, temporary corrals, men working with branding irons. How many men? 6 that I could see. Maybe more inside the tents. Cordelia thought about the list of names. The pattern of widows selling their land or disappearing altogether. The careful timing that had followed her husband's death. We need proof they cannot deny. We need to catch them moving stolen cattle through your property. When is the next movement scheduled? Equabo produced the papers they had studied. His finger found a date circled in red ink. Tomorrow night, a large herd. The writing suggests this is important. They spent the afternoon planning. Cordelia would ride to the county seat and bring back the territorial marshal. Equop would document the cattle movement and follow the herd to its destination. Together they would present evidence that could not be dismissed or explained away. Evening brought visitors. Sheriff Murdoch arrived with Deputy Barnes as Cordelia finished her simple dinner. Their timing felt deliberate. Their manner suggested official business rather than social concern. Heard you were asking questions in town today. Murdoch settled his bulk into her kitchen chair without invitation. About what that Comanche might have stolen. I am curious about what was buried on my land. Best to leave such things alone. Barnes positioned himself near the door. Some stones are better left unturned. Cordelia poured coffee with steady hands. I assume you are investigating the theft. What theft? Murdoch's tone carried careful neutrality. No crime has been reported. No property claimed is missing. Then what was in the leather pouch? Could have been anything. Could have been nothing. The sheriff's eyes swept her kitchen, taking inventory of her modest possessions. Point is dwelling on mysteries will not help your situation. My situation? Foreclosure in 9 days. Grimwald's offer expires soon after. Murdoch accepted the coffee cup. Wise woman would take the money and find somewhere safer to live. They stayed until full darkness fell. Their conversation wandered through weather and crops and local gossip, but their presence carried the weight of warning. When they finally left, Cordelia understood that her partnership with Equop had been noticed. She waited an hour before lighting the signal lamp they had agreed upon. 3 flashes visible from the ridge where Equop kept watch. His answering signal came immediately. 1 flash, danger. She extinguished the lamp and waited in darkness. Footsteps approached her house from multiple directions. Soft voices coordinated movement around her property. Men positioned themselves to watch every exit. The siege was subtle but complete. She was trapped inside her own home by people who meant her harm disguised as protection. Hours passed in tense silence. Cordelia sat at her kitchen table, the rifle across her knees, waiting for whatever would come next. Outside, shadows moved, with purpose that spoke of practiced coordination. Near midnight, she smelled smoke. Not the clean scent of cooking fires. The thick, oily smoke of burning hay and old wood. Her barn was burning. The flames would spread to her house if the wind shifted wrong. She ran outside without thinking. The barn blazed against the night sky. Sparks rose toward stars that seemed suddenly very distant. Heat pressed against her face as she grabbed buckets and ran toward the well. The men emerged from shadows as she worked alone against the fire. They did not offer help. They watched her struggle with expressions that suggested disappointment rather than concern. Terrible accident. Sheriff Murdoch appeared beside the blazing structure. These old buildings catch fire so easily. Lucky no one was hurt. Deputy. Barnes held a torch that cast dancing shadows across his face. Could have been much worse. Cordelia understood then that the fire was both message and method. Pressure designed to break her resistance. Proof that accidents could happen to people who asked too many questions. The barn burned to the ground, while she stood helpless beside the smoking ruins. 9 days to foreclosure, no barn to shelter livestock, no crops stored for winter feed. No choice but to accept whatever terms were offered by the people who had orchestrated her destruction. As the last flames died to glowing embers, Martha Hendricks appeared with a basket of food and words of comfort that felt rehearsed. "I am so sorry, dear, but perhaps this is Providence showing you the way forward." The seamstress smiled in the firelight while speaking of Providence and new beginnings. But her eyes held satisfaction that belonged to someone whose carefully laid plans were approaching completion. Cordelia accepted the food and the false sympathy. She agreed that perhaps it was time to consider her options seriously. But inside, she felt something harder than fear settling in her chest. They had burned her barn thinking fire would break her spirit. Instead, it had forged her resolve into something that would not bend or break. Tomorrow night, stolen cattle would move through her property. Tomorrow night, she would gather the proof needed to destroy the people who had murdered her husband and stolen her peace. The embers glowed red against black sky while shadows retreated to whatever holes they had crawled from. Cordelia remained beside the ruins, making plans that would shock the people who thought they owned her fear. Market day arrived with dust, clouds and the sound of wagons converging on town. Cordelia dressed carefully in her best black dress, the one she had worn to her husband's funeral. Today it would serve a different purpose but carry the same weight of finality. Territorial Judge Harrison Webb had arrived the night before. His presence drew settlers from 50 miles around. Justice was a rare commodity on the frontier. When it came to town, people gathered to witness its workings. Cordelia walked through the crowd with the leather pouch hidden beneath her shawl. Every face she passed might belong to friend or enemy. The conspiracy had roots deeper than she had imagined. Trust had become a luxury she could no longer afford. Martha Hendricks intercepted her near the courthouse steps. The seamstress wore her finest dress and a smile that belonged on Sunday mornings rather than market days. "How wonderful to see you out and about, dear." Martha's hand found Cordelia's arm with practiced familiarity. "After the terrible business with your barn, I feared you might hide away. Fire destroys buildings, it does not destroy resolve." Such brave words. Martha's grip tightened slightly. "I do hope you have given serious thought to your situation. Mr. Grimwald mentioned his offer expires today." Cordelia met the woman's eyes. Behind the facade of maternal concern lay something cold and calculating. Something that belonged to predators rather than neighbors. "I have given my situation considerable thought, and I have decided to seek justice rather than accept charity." Martha's smile faltered for just a moment, long enough for Cordelia to see the mask slip and reveal the face beneath. Then the expression of kindly concern returned, painted over truth that had shown itself too briefly to deny. "Justice is a dangerous word, dear. Sometimes acceptance serves us better." Judge Webb emerged from the courthouse with the bearing of a man accustomed to being obeyed. His gray hair and weathered face spoke of decades spent weighing evidence and pronouncing verdicts. Federal marshals flanked him on either side. The crowd gathered in the street. Market day had transformed into something resembling a trial. Cordelia stepped forward, her heart hammering against her ribs. This moment would determine whether justice existed on the frontier, or whether power always trumped truth. "Your Honor," her voice carried across the assembled crowd, "I wish to present evidence of crimes committed in this county." Judge Webb studied her with eyes that had seen every variety of human deception. "What manner of crimes, Mrs. Ashworth?" Cordelia opened the leather pouch. The papers rustled in the morning breeze. Maps and schedules and lists of names spread across the courthouse steps for everyone to see. Cattle rustling, murder, conspiracy to defraud widows of their property. The crowd's murmur rose and fell with the rhythm of shared breath. "Sheriff." Murdoch pushed through to the front, his face showing appropriate concern for a woman clearly suffering from grief-induced delusions. "Your Honor, Mrs. Ashworth has endured terrible losses recently. Her judgment may be compromised by emotional strain." "Then let us examine the evidence and determine its merit." Judge Webb accepted the papers from Cordelia's trembling hands. His examination was thorough and silent. The crowd waited while justice weighed truth against comfortable lies. These documents detail extensive criminal activity. The judge's voice carried the authority of law applied without favor. "Who provided this evidence?" Ekwolp emerged from the crowd. His presence caused ripples of unease among the assembled townspeople. A Comanche warrior walking freely through their market day challenged assumptions about power and place. "I tracked stolen cattle from my people's former lands." His words fell clear and precise into the morning air. The trail led to this county, to these people. Martha Hendricks stepped forward with the confidence of someone accustomed to being believed. Her voice carried maternal authority that had swayed countless disputes over the years. "Your Honor, surely you will not take the word of a savage over respectable citizens. This man stole from Mrs. Ashworth only days ago." "What did he steal?" The question hung in silence. Martha's mouth opened and closed without sound. Around her, the faces of respected citizens showed varying degrees of guilt poorly disguised as righteous indignation, evidence. Cordelia's voice cut through the quiet. "He stole evidence of your crimes." Judge Webb studied the altered branding irons with the careful attention of someone who understood their purpose. The maps showed clear routes across private property. The schedules matched dates when cattle had been reported missing from ranches across 3 counties. "Sheriff Murdoch." The judge's tone carried the weight of coming judgment. "How do you explain these documents found buried on Mrs. Ashworth's property?" "I cannot explain what I have never seen before. Yet your name appears on several of these papers." "As does yours, Mr. Grimwold, and yours, Miss Hendricks." The banker pushed forward with bluster that fooled no one. "This is clearly a fabrication, designed to discredit honest business people." "Fabricated by whom?" The question found no answer. The crowd watched as their most respected citizens struggled to explain evidence that spoke louder than their protests of innocence. "There is more." Ekwolf produced additional papers from his shirt. Names of missing women, locations where they were taken, threats made against those who refused to sell their land. Judge Webb examined the new evidence with growing severity. "Mrs. Mitchell, Mrs. Foster, other names I recognize from missing persons reports." His gaze swept the crowd, settling on faces that had grown pale with recognition. "Where are these women?" Martha Hendricks made one final desperate attempt to control the narrative. "Your Honor, surely you will not allow our community to be destroyed by the lies of a desperate widow and her savage accomplice." "I see no lies here." The judge's voice carried finality. "Only evidence of systematic criminal activity disguised as civic leadership." The federal marshals moved through the crowd with practiced efficiency. Sheriff Murdoch, Banker Grimwold, and Martha Hendricks found themselves surrounded by men whose authority superseded local corruption. The missing women were found yesterday at a camp 30 miles north. Judge Webb addressed the assembled crowd. Alive but held against their will through threats and intimidation. Relief rippled through the gathering. Justice had teeth on this frontier morning. Truth had proven stronger than comfortable lies. Judge Webb turned to Ekwolp with something approaching respect. "You could have used this evidence for revenge against the people who displaced your tribe. Why did you choose justice instead? Hekwap's answer carried across the silent crowd. Justice protects the innocent. Revenge only creates more suffering. Mrs. Ashworth showed me trust when no one else would. Honor demanded I help her finish what her husband started. The words settled into hearts that had forgotten what honor looked like when stripped of self-interest. A Comanche warrior had chosen mercy over vengeance. A white widow had chosen partnership over prejudice. Together, they had exposed corruption that masqueraded as respectability. 6 months later, Cordelia stood beside her rebuilt fence watching Equif teach his daughter how to mend broken wood with careful hands. The little girl laughed as she struggled with tools too large for her small fingers. Her cough had disappeared, along with the fear that had haunted her father's eyes. The fence they built together stood stronger than either could have constructed alone. It marked not a barrier between different worlds, but a bridge across the space where understanding grew from shared struggle. The sunset painted the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Cattle moved peacefully across grassland that had known too much violence for too many years. In the distance, smoke rose from chimneys where families gathered around tables, blessed by honest work and earned rest. Justice had come to the frontier wearing faces that nobody expected. It had spoken in languages that nobody wanted to hear. But it had proven stronger than corruption disguised as civilization, more powerful than hatred dressed as righteousness. The wind carried the scent of sage and distant rain. Cordelia and Equip worked in comfortable silence, building something that would endure long after their names were forgotten. Building proof that honor could exist between strangers who chose trust over fear. And that is all to the story, for now. Please let me know where you are tuning in from. Perhaps we will create a story there. Consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel, and if you enjoy our content, click this video on your screen. I promise you, it's worth watching. See you tomorrow.